Everybody, the 2023 Ozanam Conversation. Now let's pass on to our State President, Michael Quinn. Thank you.
Welcome to you all, one and all. Thanks for coming out this afternoon to this Ozanam Conversation. This is, I think, my fourth. The first one I attended was back in 18, and Claire Victory was just been appointed as the national president, and she gave a wonderful introduction to who she is and where she's from and what she intended to do. And we're blessed to have Mark here today, and I impose on him to do the same. What's his vision for us going for the next 14 years, because we're going to reappoint him for a few times because I think he's pretty good. Anyway, I'll get back on track. Acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge with deep respect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, First Peoples are the traditional custodians of Australia, and acknowledge all the First Nations peoples on this land across which we work. We acknowledge the richness, diversity and sophistication of the culture of First Nations people. We acknowledge with sorrow the wrongs of the past that have taken place and continue today. We pay deep respects to elders past and present and honour the strong leadership that is evident in the emerging elders of tomorrow. We hope to partner together to work to build a more just and compassionate society for the traditional owners of this land. Now, I've just come from a state council meeting, and I can assure you they're quite robust, and many discussions are had about what we do. There was discussions today about budget and all that sort of stuff because things are tight, you know. We're getting hammered from left, right and centre. But I can assure the members here today that the decision has always been we may have to cut back, but we don't cut back on assistance to people we serve. Because at the heart of who we are and what we do is the people we are serving. It's, you know, today was discussed our mission. What is our mission? What does it mean? Thank you, Josh, for that comment today. Our mission is always to not care about ourselves, but it's supporting people in need, but also the journey we take on in that path. That's what drives us. The people in need, that's part of our servant leadership, what we do. And as your state president, I'm very proud to be in that position and work with all of you here today and all the members in our society, the 3,700 members. And I will say to you all that we're the only state in this country of Australia with an increasing membership. You should be all very proud of that. And with our 6,600 volunteers who support our special works and what we do in stores, soup vans, reading clubs, prison visitations, that's amazing. So with that, I'll continue my task, and I'll introduce Mark Ganatani, our National President, please, to come forward and to speak to us for 2 minutes. I'm only joking.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for that warm welcome. And it's fantastic to be here in Melbourne today. And I'll probably take a little bit longer than 2 minutes, Michael. So please bear with me. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Look, before I talk a little bit about my vision for the society for the next 4 years, because I certainly won't be going 14 years, that's for sure. I'm in the first quarter of the first quarter, so... so my name's Mark Gaetani. I live in Launceston in Tasmania. I'm married. I have 3 children. In fact, 2 of those live in your city here in Melbourne. One lives in Collingwood and the other one lives in Elwood. Looking forward to catching up with them tomorrow when we give the pies a bit of a knock-up tomorrow, Michael. Okay, so I've been a member of St Vincent de Paul Society now for about 8 years. I started on National Council, was invited to join them as the treasurer at a particular time, so I spent 2 years on that council, and then I was fortunate enough to be elected state president, and my term as state president concluded in January this year, and I was very, very fortunate to have been nominated and voted as the new national president for all of you. It's an honour, but it's a responsibility that I'm committed to over the next 4 years. Just want to give you a few snippets of my vision going forward for my term. I'm very much mission driven. We're here for a purpose, to serve the poor, and to serve the poor in the words of the gospel. And I'm a strong advocate of Catholic social teaching. There is a document that if you'd like to do some searching on our national website, there's a document on Catholic social teaching that was prepared by David Bonner, I believe, some short period of time. I'd encourage you to spend some time reading that document, because in my view that reflects the work that we should be doing with the poor, and you'll hear a little bit more about that as the months and the years go by when I'm doing my role. I don't think we should be too scared in our community to identify as Catholics, because the majority of us are, and I just think sometimes we forget our identity. We live very much in a post-Christian world, and that's ever more a reason for me to identify as Catholics in the work that we do. Michael's just kindly informed us that he's the only state out of 8 states and territories where their membership is growing. I congratulate Michael and his state council on the work that you're all doing to reinvigorate your conferences. I was just talking to Brendan a moment ago about the work that he's doing in the western suburbs and the growth areas out there. So, whilst Victoria's growing in membership, the rest of the country isn't. I can assure you, we're remaining stagnant, and for all sorts of reasons, and I'm not going to go through those reasons today because we don't have time. But one of my first appointments on National Council was to actually appoint a Vice President responsible for membership. Matt Noonan, who some of you might know, he's accepted that role and been working very, very closely with me and with all other membership personnel and conference members in the country. We've got Congress towards the end of the year, and I'd encourage you all to be involved in that conversation in your conferences and feed that feedback through to Michael and State Council. So membership is a big part of my vision, as is youth. There's a lot of us that have got sort of, this sort of colour hair, grey hair, but we shouldn't shy away from the fact that we do have young people in the society. I quite often hear people saying to me, youth are the future. Well, they are, but we've got them here already. So let's not be afraid to engage with youth. Let's not be afraid to encourage them, listen to them importantly. We've got to listen to our young people because, they have different ideas on how to be a conference member, what conferences mean for them. So you'll see a lot more discussion around youth and conferences and different models of operation. Finally, housing and homelessness is a real passion of mine. It has been ever since I started with the St Vincent de Paul Society. When I grew up in a housing department area in Georgetown. Some of you might have heard Georgetown, very industrialised, very diverse population of migrants who came out to Australia in the late 1940s and early 1950s. And it was, a working person's town. but there was not one person in that town that was homeless. And I remember that when I was a young fella. And when we all pick up the newspapers and we listen to the radio or the news or whatever we listen to today, housing and homelessness is a massive issue in this country. And I'd like to see the society talking with one voice when it comes to housing and homelessness. If we wish to be effective, we need to talk in one voice for those that are homeless and those that are at risk of homelessness. So there'll be a lot of work that we'll be doing at National Council when it comes to supporting those individuals. Just finally, before I hand back to Michael, 2 or 3 weeks ago I was fortunate enough to spend some time with Oceania state presidents of the society here, our neighbours, and there'll be a little bit more that will come out public to all conference members about how we're going to support our Oceania conference members in 8 or 9 countries that form part of our zone. So there's a lot of work to be done, and there's a massive need in those small countries that are subject to poverty, extreme levels of poverty. So that's another piece of work that I would like to be involved in and see supported by our members. Thanks, Michael. I hope I haven't spoken too soon. Thank you, Arthur. Thanks. I'll come back again shortly. Thank you.
In recent years, we've seen many disasters that have affected individuals, families and communities profoundly. These are just a few images of the impact that these disasters have had.
Just minutes from the CBD, flooding in Melbourne, leading forces to rooms and pulled into boats as the Maribyrnong River swallowed up cars, businesses and scores of homes, leaving residents in shock.
I knew it was going to be a monster when I saw that as soon as that started, we knew it was going to get to it became critical. On that Monday morning, we had a community meeting and we basically laid out what was going to happen. It was going to be a catastrophic event. We told people that we should do.
When the 2019 Black Summer fires happened, we approached our role as second responders, always with the long-term view. Rebuilding homes, lives and communities can take many years. For over 169 years, we have continued to be here for Victorians every step of the way. Our experience after Black Saturday fires in 2000 and then in 2019 and 2020 bushfires, told us that it would take 12 to 15 months for people to slowly return to their homes or to a new location. We've made an impact in many ways. One-off community grants, funding for essential resources such as land clearing, water tanks, fencing, material assistance, food, clothing, bedding, laptops, school uniforms. Extended support based on community needs, including higher education grants, a trauma counsellor for Melaleuca College, supporting facilities, and 2 minibuses for primary schools. We are actually actively assisting people in these communities as long as we are needed.
We were given just 8 minutes to grab the kids and whatever we could and to get out. The river rose so fast. My husband and I have 2 kids, aged 6 and 12. We lost everything.
This is one family's experience of flood-accepted area. They lost everything, including everything their children needed for school, uniforms, laptops, etc. Thanks to the assistance of a generous supporter, this family now has not have to worry about how to pay for school fees for next year, or new uniforms, new bags, shoes, or a new laptop. Within 48 hours of the town's flooding, we launched a flood appeal. Donors were very generous, enabling members and volunteers to respond immediately. Nearly $525,000 was received. You can see how the breakdown is how it was distributed. The work of recovery is long term and in many cases still taking place. Thanks to our members, volunteers and supporters, we continue to work alongside individuals, families and communities through the journey of disaster recovery now and into the future. It's now my pleasure to invite the following Marketing, our National President, to come forward, please. Marella Diaz, CEO Emergency Recovery Victoria, and Amanda Logie, Rochester Community House, Rochester. And also invite our facilitator, Brother Tony Clark, to come forward, please. Surviving through disasters, our role as in disaster recovery is what we have learned from our previous experience. I'll pass that to Brother Tony.
Thank you, Arthur, and thank you for all of you who've come to join us in this conversation. It's interesting looking at those images of natural disasters which have touched thousands of people's lives in recent years. Pope Francis, in his powerful document called Laudato Si, really combines gets us to look at how the interplay between ecology, poverty, and human development. We will hear today how natural disasters affect people's lives. We obviously have an issue of climate change, how we deal with the environment and its impact on human lives. So it's very timely that St Vincent de Paul have opened up this topic of natural disasters, not to look at statistics, not to look at how we necessarily respond, but to make us think more deeply about how this impacts on ordinary people's lives and maybe how we can respond better. So we have the privilege of listening to Mariella's experience, Amanda's experience, and Mark's. And prior to this conversation, we gave some questions just to help maybe focus, because it's only 7 minutes for each person initially, and then we will open it up for questions from the audience. And we thank for those people who are looking online too, as to, unfortunately you won't have the opportunity to ask questions, but maybe by telepathy you could get something through. So we'll start with you, Mariella, first, and thank you, Arthur, for the microphone. The two questions we've got for you, and maybe I'll just give them both together and you can deal with how you wish. What are the three biggest challenges Emergency Recovery Victoria usually face when dealing with natural disasters? And the second, in what ways are community welfare organisations most helpful? And then where can they be unhelpful? So maybe if you'd like to address those two questions.
So I guess that probably the biggest challenge in every emergency is the fact that every emergency is different. What we try in one emergency won't necessarily work in another. So for example, we've got this program called the Clean-Up Program, and we started that in the 1920 fires in eastern Victoria, where most of the properties were destroyed. There were over 360 properties destroyed in some very isolated parts of the Victorian High Country. Obviously the most one that you would have heard most of is around Mallacoota, but there were certainly other areas. So that involved just cleaning up people's properties that were totally destroyed. So it meant hygienists going in there, the big tractors going in there and pulling everything out. So that was one lot of clean-up. Then in the storms 2 years ago that mostly affected the Dandenong Ranges, the clean-up looked very different. We needed very different type of machinery to pull big giant mountain ash trees off people's properties before we could even start. And this time around in the floods, the clean-up is different again, because mould is a very insidious problem that doesn't necessarily raise its ugly teeth until months after the emergency itself. So what might look like a house that's not damaged, and if you drive through many parts of flood-impacted areas now, on the outside it looks like everything's fine, but those houses are completely uninhabitable. So I guess with every emergency being different, it means every time we need to design new things. So sometimes we don't go as fast as we need to go to meet community need. And earlier on there was a discussion around homelessness and housing. What is very different today to what existed 5 years ago is that there is no rental market. So if 1,800 people become homeless, which is what happened during these previous floods, they can't go to the local real estate and say, I need somewhere to stay for 12 months, please. There is no place for them to stay for 12 months. Particularly in country Victoria, towns like Rochester, and I won't talk about Rochester because I will let you do that.
Just put the microphone at the back.
Shepparton, same thing, there is no rental market. For the first time we utilised the National Resilience Centre, known as MICLIM, or otherwise most people will know it as Hotel Quarantine. So for the first time we used that facility, and 1,800 people utilised that facility, hotels and motels all over Victoria. That number is down to about 350 now that are utilising state-supported accommodation, including Elmore Village in Rochester. But what that group represents is Victoria's probably most vulnerable people for a variety of reasons, either because their town has no habitable homes to live in, or because they are vulnerable through disability, age, or poverty, or all of the above. So that group, I think, is the one that is hardest now to problem solve what they require, because if they want to stay within their towns, there really isn't anywhere suitable to be. So these are very wicked problems that we're now dealing with when it comes to climate change and emergency after emergency after emergency. So Victoria had one in 1920, in 21, and now in 22. So every year we're experiencing major catastrophes that impact significantly across towns.
So you mentioned one is being able to respond creatively to very different situations. The second is the availability of housing for people when they're facing natural disasters. And then the third was...
Well, it's moving at pace.
Yes, there's so many...
You have to move quickly and stay moving quickly, which is a significant challenge. But I guess the untold story behind the human experience is the trauma and the stress. So even if people haven't been directly impacted, even if they haven't lost their homes, their neighbours have, or they've lost a loved one, or people have had to move away, or the incredible isolation that goes either because they're isolated by water or because they've lost their friends. So this impact on mental health compounds over time. So being very, very attuned to trauma-informed practice and supporting people through stress. People show their stress in very different ways. So I think one of the good things about the pandemic, and there aren't that many good things about it, but one of the good things is that people, I think, are better at saying it's okay to not be okay. And we're seeing that now, that people are coming forward, where 3 years ago they were not coming forward, potentially for 2 or 3 years after the event. So we've seen a much earlier uptake of the supports that are in place. So that is one area that I think St Vincent de Paul Society can be really helpful. I've noticed in how where you're donating are the right places. So I would say where you're putting your money, we keep doing that because those are the right places. Working together with other community service organisations such as the Red Cross, who are our partner in relief, and Food Bank. So sometimes where it doesn't work, where agencies aren't helpful, is everyone's doing their own thing. It has to be coordinated. Communities don't need 30 different type of volunteer groups coming in offering 30 different things. They might only need 3 things, and if those 3 things are coordinated well, it can work really, really well, and that's where I think community get most benefit.
Who usually does the coordination in these circumstances?
So in relief, Red Cross help us to coordinate volunteer organisations, and then we have different ones such as Give It. They have an online portal, so it stops people donating stuff, and often very unhelpful stuff, like half-empty sauce bottles. Money is a much better way to donate, because that's often people want to choose their own mattresses.
Yeah.
And that's part of being community-led. People are in charge of their own recovery, and they should be. That is empowering, and that helps their recovery. Not everyone wants a second-hand mattress or a cot mattress that's stained. They want things that they can choose themselves. So Give It is a really good way to support donations, as well as financial donations, and Red Cross help us do that. Because they're our partner in all disasters, and they're very experienced in doing that. And psychological first aid. So having people that are trained and support in relief centres is really important. The Red Cross get very tired. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, often for weeks on end. But the final thing that is helpful is be around for the long haul. After the cameras go away, after the daily announcements from government, after the daily visits from officials and prime ministers and premiers, when those things stop is when communities really start to feel the pressure, and they start to say things like, we feel abandoned, no one cares anymore, because all of that early intensity of community support starts to fade, and there is this prevailing view that it's all over, surely it's okay now. So the 1920 fires, half of those people that lost their homes still haven't rebuilt. It's been 3 years.
Because I noticed Arthur said that something about 18 months or was after which, but I imagine it's a much longer process than even 18 months.
Yeah.
Would that be right?
It can take 12 months just to get a planning permit.
Right.
So
we're talking about the immediate crisis, and then
correct.
the longer term.
Correct. And then we have this problem where people are uninsured or not insured at all. So, and often uninsured is the sleeper, because a lot of people that first took out their insurance policies may have taken, if they're elderly in particular, may have taken those policies out in the 80s. So their house may still be only insured for, $80,000, because that's what they paid for it back in the 80s. It doesn't, I can tell you that it will cost you nearly $1 million to build a house in some of the most isolated, dense bush areas of Victoria. If you're in a bell rating of 40, you will not have any change of $800,000 to build a house. So it's those kind of problems that people are facing, and often it subjects them then to the rest of their lives in poverty, because their main asset is gone. Am I over my 7 minutes now?
You are over your 7 minutes. Just very quickly, I'm also interested in, you're talking about the mental health. What are you finding really is effective support in terms of offering the mental health that people need in these situations? Just even basic.
I think it's a broad range. I think when there's this prevailing view that mental health requires clinical counselling. It doesn't always need clinical counselling, but it's a strong presence of knowing where to go to speak to someone when they need it, right at that moment. I remember during the Hazelwood event where the coal mine was on fire for weeks and weeks on end, and I was in the relief centre. We'd set up like a place where people would come and have their oxygen level tested and a variety of health checks, and just to speak to someone. And I was my background is child protection, and I'm a qualified family therapist and social worker, so I was just sitting there, and this woman came and sat to me and she said, I actually don't know what it is that I want to say to you, but I know I just don't feel right. My son has just bought his little house here in Morwell. It's a very cheap house, it's his first house. His house is worth nothing. And then she just burst into tears. She didn't know why she was there, she was driven to come there, but it wasn't until she started talking, and it was that, sometimes it's just the ability to speak spontaneously, other times it is clinical support, because the problems and the stress are so entrenched that it becomes a depressive illness that requires far more help. So it's the whole gamut. It's a presence at the footy games, it's a presence at the local neighbourhood houses, and it's for the community to be able to know who to invite that can come and support them. It's organising community events, and look, after a time, during the bushfires, people would say, the times that I've been there more recently, it's like, we are so tired of community events, Mario, we just don't want any more community events. But at the beginning, they were really, really helpful. The Friday night barbecues were very, very helpful. So it's horses for courses, and the best people to ask is the community recovery committees, because that's the community-led approach is, well, we're not doing to people. It's very, very important not to do to people. These are functioning communities that know what they need, and they might need some help to understand what's available and to put those things in motion.
Well, I think you've given us an excellent segue to hand over to Amanda, but before we do, I know Mariella's going to be talking later, but maybe we give her a hand. Just listening to you, I think the state's very fortunate to have someone like you in this role.
Thank you.
Amanda, you were doing lots of nodding while Mariella's speaking. So the question we gave you as the representative from Rochester Community House, in what ways were you and the Rochester community most affected by the recent floods? And that's not an easy question to ask or to answer. And what support and assistance was most effective at the time? And what assistance are people still requiring?
Thank you. So, yes, lots of nodding. Marielle is right on the ball when she talks about community-led responses to these, to any event, to any emergency event that occurs, because the community, they know their people, they know what's needed. So, and quite often things can happen a lot faster when there's less people involved from government agencies. And I mean that in no disrespectful way, it's just that we're on the ground there and then, and we see a need and we just fix it, or we do whatever needs to happen. But we've got a bit of a saying in Rochester. So 90% of our community was inundated, but 100% of our community were affected by the event in October. I actually am very fortunate. I live a block from the Capacity River, but it's also apparently on a bit of a hill, and so I wasn't impacted directly. I did not have water through my house. Very good friends of mine just over the back did have water through their house. They didn't get wet back in 2011, but they say that no two floods are the same. So we were very busy moving people into our house. At one stage we had 9 people living in our house, and it was organised chaos, but it was beautiful, and we'd do it again in a heartbeat given the circumstances. But in saying that we weren't affected, or we weren't impacted, my children no children went to school in our town for 2 weeks. All of the schools were closed. Those kids, they sandbagged, they ripped up carpets, they stood side by side with the adults in the community and did what needed to be done. Both in the lead up, my kids door knocked on the Thursday night with me, evacuating people, and was still ripping carpet out in the weeks after. So very proud of all the kids in our community. But they're also, and I have got a few notes because we've all got a bit of a broken brain in Rochester. So my youngest, grade 6, so he actually finished school in Bendigo. So when the kids did go back to school, a lot of them were travelling to Bendigo which is an hour away by bus. And when you get bus sick, it's not a great way to spend the last few weeks of your schooling years. So, and then some of the preps, they tried to have them a bit closer at Almond, just up the road. So we've just gone past the 7-month mark. It's turned really cold really quickly. We, over the last couple of weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, have given out probably 2,000 blankets and doonas and woodies. There's been some woodies thrown in there, just through the sheer generosity of people. We've given out about 200 heaters, 100 of which were actually donated by St Vincent de Paul Society, which was just amazing. And the really amazing thing about these kind of donations from these kind of organisations, it's immediate. I'm on the phone to people going, this is what we need. And then 2 days later, this is what we've got. So it really was amazing to actually make those connections. I remember sitting at Marie's house with Arthur and a group of people and just asking us, and like Mariella said, we know what we need in our community. So the fact that you actually took the time to come to our community, ask us what we needed. I did actually jot down the insect repellent when I saw it up on the screen, because we don't have the mosquitoes that we had literally picking us up and carrying us away in those first instances. So I guess, and I'm mindful of my time, I guess, there's so many ways that we're impacted, and I'll just touch on the mental health support. So our neighbourhood house is funded for 25 hours a week, and within those first few weeks we could see it was essentially important to have mental health support on the ground, because the people were coming to us and they were broken. They needed someone to talk to, and it's not, as Mariella said, it's not that high level of support that's needed. Sometimes they just need to tell their story, and they just need to be able to verbalise what they're feeling.
So someone to listen.
Absolutely, just someone to listen to, and we were that someone. So within the recovery hub, so our response and our instant relief centre was all community driven. So our local government knew that there were people within the community, myself included, that had been through the 2011 event, and so we knew what we were doing. So they entrusted us to lead our community through this whole process, which was really beneficial for our community, absolutely beneficial.
So that experience helped.
Absolutely, yeah. And the experience of the people on the ground and the ability to be able to do things immediately. So we were, in those initial first few weeks, we were having morning meetings, catching up, seeing what was happening. There's also, jumping back to not being impacted directly, there's a huge feeling of guilt that comes with that.
Okay.
And I was physically sick for the first few days. I was really, just physically unwell, could not even leave the house. I just felt ill because I knew that,
You weren't flooded.
I wasn't flooded, and here were my closest friends living with us, kids on the floor sleeping on mattresses because they were flooded, and it was just heartbreaking. And knowing what we were going to have to do and how long we were going to have to be doing it too.
So that gives us a picture of the 100% affected.
Absolutely.
Even though, what was it, 90%?
Yeah, 90% inundated in our community. So we've got a map up on the wall, and it's got highlighted in blue all of our township, the houses that were inundated, and green, the houses that were missed. And there's only a small little area and a few little dots in between where there's green on the map. And back in 2011, it was quite reversed. You'd have the odd house that was wet, and the houses in obvious low-lying areas were wet, but not to the extent of what happened in the October event.
And what's the right now? What's the biggest needs that you hear people?
It's ever changing.
Other than insect repellent.
Well, we don't need insect repellent now. What we need now are heaters and blankets. We've got a lot of blankets. We also do have a lot of heaters, but clothes dryers. You've got people. People are not going to be in their houses for up to 2 years. We've got people coming in only this week saying that their houses are actually not going to be repaired by their insurance companies. They've been declared a total loss, and so the only thing for them is demolition.
And you've got some people in tents, you were saying?
Yeah, so we've got people in tents, in sheds, in camper trailers. There's over 300 caravans parked in people's driveways. It's heartbreaking, and it's freezing. I think it was 2 degrees, and we get into the minuses up where we are at night, and it is freezing.
Frosty.
Yeah, very, very frosty. So it's just incredible. And imagine you've got 2 caravans in your backyard, you've got 4 kids in one caravan, and mum and dad in the other caravan, and those kids have got school uniforms. How do they get dry? Where do you dry them? So it's always 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, because you just think that you've got on top of things and things are starting to go okay, but then it goes backwards again. So we have the Give It platform might work really well in communities where there's a high level of people on the internet and have that ability, but Rochester actually is an ageing population, and we do have higher levels of aged population in comparison to the state. And so for us, we've actually created our own. We actually laugh about it and say it's a bit of a furniture Tinder program that we have. And so, but it's literally people will ring us. They know that the neighbourhood house is a go-to place. We're part of the recovery hub. And so they'll ring us and say, I've got this, or I need this, and we just marry it up and we just make it happen. So, but again, with the ability to be able to respond to our community's needs and what our community will be able to utilise moving forward.
Just very quickly, what's the history of Rochester Community House?
Yeah, so I've been there for about 14 years, I think. The house itself is nearly 30 years old, 20 years old. It's coming up, and I do know the answer. I feel like it's coming up to be 20 years old next year.
Well, let's say 20.
Let's work with 20 next year.
What started it?
Just a group of people that wanted somewhere in the community to go to as a bit of a meeting place. So it just evolved from there, and neighbourhood houses just come into their own in the circumstances of an emergency, or you know, we respond to our community's needs, and we do have a saying in the sector that if you've been to one neighbourhood house, you've been to one neighbourhood house, because they are all very, very different.
Yeah. Amanda, thank you very much. Please thank Amanda. Mark, in what ways is a St Vincent de Paul Society most effective from what you've experienced and learned so far when dealing with natural disaster situations? And the converse, what should the society avoid or refrain from doing?
Thank you, Brother Tony, for the invitation. Now, my response is going to be very much on a global level and a national level. The two previous presenters spoke beautifully about what's happening in their communities. So I'm just going to talk at that global level. So it's great to be here and to participate in the 2023 Ozanam Conversation. The Society has a proud history of supporting Australians in need for over 170 years, and the first conference was actually established in Melbourne back in 1854, so congratulations. We support Australians in need across the country every day, and we stand shoulder to shoulder with Australians during major emergencies such as bushfires, droughts and floods, and more recently during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Society is not a first responder to national disasters. However, during some crises like the Black Summer bushfires, some of our members became first responders as fires swept through their local communities. Our members, volunteers and staff always stand ready to help people in need following the immediate aftermath of danger that comes with a natural disaster. With a long history of collaborating with emergency services, government and other charities in providing accommodation, support, services and material assistance. There is a richness in our story, especially over the past 3 years, so I'll try to do my best to give you a solid overview without getting into too much of the detail. In recent times we've responded to major droughts, bushfires and flood emergencies, as I mentioned, as well as the pandemic. For example, between the 2019 and 21 period, the Society assisted over 15,000 recipients through the Drought Community Support Initiative, which was managed out of the National Council Secretariat, and I acknowledge Toby O'Connor, who's just joined us from, he's the CEO of National Council Secretariat. In partnership with local conferences, almost 50% of drought-affected local government associations in Australia, we dealt with personally 50%, and the Salvation Army tackled the remaining 50%, so that's a huge effort from the Society. An evaluation by AEU found that our administration of the Drought Community Support Initiative was effective and well targeted. Of the $66 million given to the Society, we accounted for all of those funds except $2,000. So that's a tremendous effort from everybody around the country that was involved in administering and distributing those funds. In relation to the bushfires, the Society worked with the Salvation Army and the Red Cross, you might recall, to distribute an additional allocation of emergency relief funds to local communities in Queensland, New South Wales, Canberra, Victoria and South Australia. Our involvement witnessed us participate in the Cabinet boardroom at federal level as the bushfires burned out of control over many weeks. The intelligence and the feedback that we were able to give from the direct reports received by our members through our state and territory councils demonstrates the confidence that governments have placed in us as members in delivering emergency relief at natural disaster time. Society's learnings about how governments, emergency services and charities react in disaster situations saw National Council make submissions to the Royal Commission into the 2019-20 backfire summer bushfires. The Society now has a seat on the National Emergency Management Agency, created by the Commonwealth Government to coordinate responses to natural disasters. The great work of responding to these natural disasters is foremost carried out by Society's state councils and territory councils. No more was this evident than during the floodings that occurred in northern New South Wales. Our state and territory councils and staff work in a collaborative partnership, sharing resources wherever a single jurisdiction might need extra support, and with other charities on the ground as we've witnessed. We've talked a little bit about person-centred approaches. The Society works from the initial emergency response phase, which is normally 0 to 6 weeks, through the recovery stage, which is 6 weeks to 3 months, and into the rebuilding phase, which is 3 months to 2 years and can be even longer. We also recognise, and we've heard this commented just by previous speakers, we also recognise that each person and community walk their own journey. In recent times, this approach has seen the Commonwealth adopt a strong place-based approach to recovery and resilience initiatives. Individuals also progress through recovery in different ways and in their own time. This means that we need to be flexible. While most people might have moved from emergency to recovery phases over several months, others might only settle for the first time several months after the disaster is hit. And we've heard those comments previously. When the pandemic hit Australia, the Commonwealth and the National Cabinet turned to the major charities for advice on where emergency relief funds should be directed. So how is the voice of our members listened to? The Society is a member of the National Coordination Group based in Canberra, established by the government specifically to advise it about where extra financial support was required across the nation throughout the pandemic. The National Coordination Group consists of 8 charities, of which we are one. It's met 71 times since the pandemic started. So this suggests, and it's correct to suggest, that the National Coordination Group is seen as an integral advisor around emergency relief and food relief initiatives. The Minister requested us to establish a small secretariat to help the work of the National Coordination Group and to advise the Department of Social Services. This sits in our own National Secretariat in Canberra. So the above suggests the Society continues to be a member-based, well-respected and trusted national reach organisation, capable of working in partnership with governments to respond in times of natural disasters. So where does the Society obtain the money to allocate to people in times of crisis? There's two sources. We draw on our own funds, and these are generated from our general donations. The surplus of our Vinnie's retail stores generate, and donations raised in response to a particular natural disaster. In respect of donations, the Society is a trusted organisation that can pivot on its brand to solicit regular donations and to initiate urgent appeals from the public, and we've seen that happen. These funds are particularly relevant because they enable asks the society to provide services that are not often covered in the guidelines of government funds. All states and territories, to a greater or lesser extent, draw on emergency relief funds allocated by the Commonwealth. In total, the Society receives between $40 to $50 million a year in emergency relief funds from the Commonwealth. This allows the Society to exhaust Caesar's money before drawing on our own funds. I'm aware this is an option that the St Vincent de Paul Victoria State Council might wish to explore. We do need to ensure that these funds are fully expended each year. Our National Council CEO sits on the National Coordinating Group, and as I mentioned, Tony's here joining us today, and he's been providing advice to the Minister about how the next funding round of emergency relief may look like. The program goes out to tender next year, allowing all state and territory councils time to consider its involvement in the future emergency relief program that will be funded by the federal government.
Mark, if I could just jump in. I see you've got a couple of other pages there. Could you just try and bring that to a closure just in the next minute? Thank you.
Sure. So before I conclude, right at the end of that, let me highlight some challenges about our ongoing involvement in responding to emergency relief situations like droughts and disasters. The decline in volunteers across the board represents a challenge, and other Commonwealth agencies have begun to identify this trend. As you know, we have a major initiative coming up soon at the Congress where we'll be talking about volunteers and how we go about recruiting more volunteers. Secondly, meaningful data. Commonwealth governments require meaningful data, live, real-time data, and unfortunately the Society is not in a position yet where we can provide real, live data. So they should only do that very well. So just before I just wrap up, at a national level, the National Council have prioritised natural disasters to the extent that we actually have recently initiated a national standing committee that will report directly to the National Council in relation to disasters. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for That's a very impressive, I must say, very impressive to see the place that St Vincent de Paul has and the credibility that that the Society has gained, both with governments and other agencies. So it's very impressive.
Thank you.
We now come to the stage where there's an opportunity for questions to be asked from the floor. I believe there are two people who are going to manage the microphones. So I think how this might best work is if you have a question, you can just raise your hand and maybe give us a sense. Very nice, good. So if you could just indicate to whom you wish to address the question, and then we'll, the lady down here towards the back, Nadia, who's lady at the back. If you wouldn't mind just giving your name.
My name is Patsy Heffernan and I'm from the Warwick Conference.
Thanks, Patsy.
In Victoria. Now, I've listened to what everybody said and I'll wrap to everything including on price at the moment. I just wondered why is it that Mark said that we can't provide live data to the government. I can understand the government now doesn't do anything unless it's got data for everything. And you just wonder why it is that our life now revolves around ticking boxes, filling in forms, and why then is it that the Salvation Army can provide data, but we can't? What are we lacking? What is our figures and our records not being kept up to date? Or what is the problem that we can't supply live data when every conference right throughout the whole of Australia is working like hell to try and supply and help needs in the local community?
That's it. I think we've got the question pretty clear. Why can't St Vincent de Paul provide the data?
Look, thank you. And my comment around the collection of live data is certainly not a criticism. It's just an observation. And yeah, all of our conferences across the country are feverishly collecting data, but it's the format of the data and it's the information. We need to have consistent data across all of our states and territories. At the moment, they're all different. We're asking very similar questions, but unfortunately, we're not quite there about having consistent questions and consistent technology to actually feed that data up from conference level up to council level, through to the national area. So there's a lot of work to be done, and the Salvation Army have actually done that well, but they've allocated resources to them. So I think it's a resource.
So the data's there,
the data's
but it's
there,
not necessarily collected
that's right, it's not
in a consistent way.
consistently. Correct.
Okay.
Just to add to that, as you said,
Michael.
each state, so I'm not looking at it, I think people don't know what's everywhere now. But what it is, each state operates separately, each conference and each regional council, all subsidiarily. Now, the problem we've got to do, and we're in the process of doing it now, looking into a database system,
Talking the Queensland model right at this very minute to try and become collaborative, as you say. Round Australia, that's the problem we have. The members, and I'm also a member, we do work very, very hard. But one thing with the Salvation Army, they haven't got as many volunteers or members as us who do the work. They're a more organised organisation of paid staff. That is one of the problems. I'm not a problem, that's good for them, but I'm very happy that we've got our structure, so that's part of it. And also, what Mark was saying about a respected person to give money to, in the bushfires, the Jewish community approached us in Victoria, and they checked every other charity, and they came to us with $2.5 million. Because they knew every cent would go to the people who we said it would. And one thing about the Jewish community, I respect them, they came into our central office on a monthly basis to see where the money was being allocated. Now, after $2.5 million was expended, we needed another $250,000. Guess where that came? To us. So that is respect for us and what we do, and we're a very trusted organisation. Thank you.
Michael, I think that answers your question. The answer is good. Thanks, Patsy. Di? Oh, sorry, yes. If you just give us your name, and then we'll come to Di.
Yeah, Tom Dowling from the Canberra Regional Council. For Amanda, Maria and I were planning to go earlier this week. Went up to Rochester.
It was great to see tradies here, I must admit. Seeing the fluos and the guys in there. Went to the cafe and they said that the tradies are godsend at the moment with the lack of material. I can only say to you that you're doing a fantastic job and keep it up.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Nice little affirmation. Di?
Thank you. I'd just like to ask Marilyn Allen a question, if I may. You talked about needing different equipment for each emergency. I'm just wondering, where does all that equipment come from? You know, has the government got a way of getting it quickly when needed? Yeah.
It's a very good question and it's a very complicated answer. Because every emergency is different, the kind of things you will need will be different. So our partnerships with big contractors are really, really important. So we've got a panel, like a procurement panel that have already been assessed. So basically when something happens, we pull that panel together of providers, which are normally builders, like at the moment it's John Zingman's group. They do a lot of insurance work and they've got the earth moving equipment and caravans and logistics capability. So we contract to them and they get going. But what is really, really important is to have the service that supports the people to access that. So they have to register. We have a concierge service, so people aren't telling their story 1,000 times. You know, they still have to probably tell them 100 times, but at least it minimises that. And that concierge is the link between the person that's been affected and the service that's been provided. So that's a very, very important part of the service. Other times it's food relief, or it might be during the storms with generators. So I just rang the CEO of Bunnings and said, can you get me 200 generators? He said, no problem, they'll be here tomorrow, and from Sydney, and here they were. So our private partnerships are very, very important, as well as our government contracts, as well as community service ones. The slowest of all of that is the government contracts.
And Mariella, would I be right in assuming that your processes are all the time being assessed and improved and working out better ways of, like your concierge service is probably something that you've introduced because you didn't want a lot of people. So is that part of your experience?
Correct. So, and that's the government made a decision to have a permanent recovery agency. We've only existed for 3 years.
Okay.
We started off with Bushfire Recovery Victoria, and all we did was the eastern fires. So last 2 days before these floods, the government announced emergency recovery in Victoria. So now we have a footprint everywhere, and the benefit of that is that there is one agency that continues to carry this intellectual knowledge from one thing to another. So before that, the last big major emergency we had was the Black Saturday fires in 2009. All that intellectual knowledge was lost.
Right.
So, and every time we're building it again. So what this means, hopefully what this means is we get better at these things and faster at these things every time.
Good. Thank you, Mariella. Another question? One at the front here.
Mark.
Where are you from, Mark?
I'm Ron, and I'm from Mount Eliza Conference.
Thank you.
This is a Ozanam government gathering, and he was a great social justice advocate. Is there a role for conferences at community level to advocate? Now, an example of this is the Maribyrnong flood. We know that land developers moved in there and built and got permission to build on low-grade land and flood-prone land. We saw a levee bank around the race course, and that was used naturally as a retarding basin years ago. And they took that away, and the community was affected with the overflow of the river when it was in flood. Now, the government has asked for an inquiry, but it was set up. The chair of that had conflict of interest. It was the community that got together and the media and advocated for a different approach to that and different terms of references and what have you.
So John, you're asking, can the members be advocates?
Yeah, that's where Rochester's the same.
Right.
Maybe a levee bank around the town because you'll get flooded again and we'll go through this process again. So, there's the big picture stuff is we've got to look forward, and does the conferences have a role to advocate for justice in this area?
Absolutely. There's only one word that I can respond to that, and that is yes. I would encourage advocacy at conference level, at diocesan level, at state level, at territory level. We've all got a role to play in advocacy on any particular issue, and that's what subsidiarity is all about. Advocating at the conference level. So it's a big yes for me.
So members can use their voice.
Absolutely.
There's food and material aid.
Yes.
But we often, that's sort of the social justice side of our work. Is sort of low key. It's often left to national and state council to speak on our behalf, but I think more encouragement needs to come from national council and state council to foster
encouraged.
And I absolutely encourage that to continue at conference level. We've all got a responsibility.
Marielle?
It's a really important point because in emergencies there are a lot of voices that are completely silent. So there's an assumption that communities are homogenous things that they all sort of move together, but they don't. So multicultural communities really suffer in emergencies because they don't have a voice to advocate for their needs. Elderly people that aren't computer literate, for example, can't access the type of technology that is now, the way of doing things. You want to apply for a grant or you need money, you have to often go online. So it's those kind of, and youth and children in particular, their voice is often very silent as well. So that's something where there's a real strong advocacy need to raise those voices and the need of those voices in communities. So there's always reviews and inquiries, nearly always, after an emergency. And the fact that this year it's only been in Maribyrnong is actually unusual. Mostly there's really big inquiries. So, but it's those kind of stronger voices and representative voices that are very, very important. Amanda, I don't know.
Yeah, and I would just add in there too, there's over 400 neighbourhood houses in Victoria alone, over 1,000 Australia-wide. Tap into them. They are the biggest resource. We can do amazing things in partnerships. We work in partnerships with a lot of organisations. And if you can tap into your local neighbourhood house in your area, and whether it's they will advocate, that's what they're there for. That is our core, we respond to our community needs, so that is our core business.
Thank you. And I also heard you in your earlier thing saying, Mark, the reason why the government respects St Vincent de Paul is because of those voices that John was speaking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. So thank you for that reminder, John. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Tony. And may I commend the panel for their contribution from a personal point of view with regard to information, both at national as well as local level.
Could you just give us your name?
I'm sorry, my name is Gordon from Country Guy.
Thank you, Gordon.
The hub of the universe.
Can I just ask Mariella and maybe Mark, with regard to cross-fertilisation, Michael mentioned about involved with Queensland. Could you just share what elements of cross-fertilisation with regard to disaster support and relief that may be in place or may not be?
What do you mean by cross-fertilisation?
I'm thinking about with New South Wales, I'm thinking about with Tasmania, I'm thinking about
the learning.
Correct, the learning curve, because we're all affected by different disasters. Thank you.
Thanks, Gordon. I might call on Tony to actually respond to that question. That's a very technical question, and I'm sure Tony has the answer, so thank you. Tony.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for
Toby, could you just come to the front, because I think there might be some cameras that need to catch you. Thank you.
Let me say I acknowledge the coordination of the elders, past, present and leading.
I used to be a Victorian. I was here in the fires of 209, then went to Canberra and did the Black Summer bushfires. They were horrific. They were so bad. I couldn't get across the lake. The lake was covered with smoke for about 6 to 8 weeks. So it was really horrific. So that's a bit of background. The learnings are because the society really supports the concept of subsidiarity. Many times that's really good. Sometimes there's some disadvantages. So there's
Tell us a little bit what subsidiarity means, because sometimes people hear the word but don't necessarily know what it means.
It's probably a... So, having worked with the bishops, I'm aware that subsidiarity comes out of Catholic social teachings, and it really means that decisions are made at the level where there is competence. Unfortunately, in the society, it's often used as a refrain that says, you can't tell us what to do. And we like to do it this way, which I think is fine, but when you're now talking about trying to get some big responses in place, it's probably not always very helpful. But it is a bit of a culture, and so what I see is that, for instance, in the fires, in the Black Summer fires that started in Queensland, went right down New South Wales into Canberra, Goulburn, Victoria and South Australia. So you need to picture this. Canberra, Goulburn is the Archdiocese of Canberra. It doesn't follow the jurisdictional boundaries of the states. So it cuts across New South Wales and goes right down the south coast. That caused a problem because New South Wales was saying, we will give X number of dollars for folks who are impacted by the bushfires because they were getting most of the donations online. That then put pressure on Canberra Goulburn because the boundary down the south coast is at Batemans Bay. So if you're on one side of the river, you've got New South Wales saying, we'll give you X number of dollars. You couldn't have people on the other side of the river being told, we'll give you X minus Y. So sometimes it's really difficult to get right. And so in the heat of the moment, you've got to make some really quick decisions. So Canberra Goulburn had to decide to do exactly the same as New South Wales, which then stretched them financially. So after the crisis, one would think maybe it's a good time for the society CEOs to get together and think about how we might do this in the future. There's not a lot of review that I can see because people are so busy doing other things like running the shops and looking after conferences. So I think we're now in a position where the leadership from National Council around what's known as national natural disasters that are now in legislation following the Black Summer bushfires. The Commonwealth has legislated where there's a natural disaster that goes across one jurisdiction into another, the Commonwealth steps in, and that's where the National Emergency Management Agency, which we sit on, is really helpful. And it's probably time that the society sat down and worked out how do we actually respond so that we are uniform.
Toby, I think what Gordon's question is asking is, what do you, in your role, how are the different experiences in different states or what have you helping to inform the type of reactions that the responses that the society gives?
So I get the information that comes to me.
The CEOs in each of the states and territories, they give me different information and their numbers are different, and I then try and make some sense of that, and I sit in the cabinet room and say this is what we're doing. And during the bushfires in particular, the Prime Minister and the Treasurer would come in and wave a finger at the charities and say, you guys, since we met 2 days ago, you've now collected an extra $250 million in donations, what are you spending it on? And I couldn't actually say, well, what the society does is this, because we do it differently. So I know I'm not really answering your question, but you have to realise, under subsidiarity, I don't have any role at all in telling states what to do. And nor would I.
Okay, is that fine? Just Mariella, if you're working for Victoria, but do you meet with other states?
So it's an equally complicated question. So there are two things. Yes, we meet nationally, the different recovery departments, focus particularly on improvement and preparedness. Where there are particular problems is often on the border towns. Because of course states do things differently. So in terms of funding, so NEMA, which is the national agency, they have this thing called the Disaster Relief Recovery Fund, so DRFA. So they're the things that are normally cost shared between states and the federal government, and they're pretty much consistent across the country, except that the Commonwealth doesn't cover everything. So the states tend to do their own thing, and Victoria is actually probably the most generous state, and hopefully they won't go all over Australia saying that. So in terms of its funds, particularly for individuals and support programs, so state governments tend to top it up, and that's often where there's difference. So different state governments fund different things, which can cause a lot of confusion, again, especially for border towns. So you can live in Moama and get nothing, and you can live in Victoria and get some things, or the other way around. And it's very problematic with also with warnings. we've got a national warning system. So when it's a catastrophic day here, it's the same language and warning systems are across Australia. So everyone in Australia should understand the warning system in the same way.
Thank you, Mariella. I'm noticing the time is nearly on 3:30, so this might be our last question. The lady in red.
Hello, I'm Megan from the Greensborough Conference.
My sister-in-law lost her property in Rochester, and she had nothing but praise for every person that just came out of the woodwork. And I suppose her question, I told her I was coming today, is where do insurance companies, or who do they have to reconcile with? She said her insurance company was outstanding. They were there within 24 hours, rip the carpets, get everything out. Same people next door, same insurance company, absolutely shocking. Who do they have to answer to? And did Amanda say Vinnie's or any other local people speak on behalf of people who have lost their properties?
Yes, so I'll let Mariella answer one part of that question, but I'll answer the latter part of the question, and that is around the fact that was going to be my question to you. Has your sister-in-law been into the recovery hub, been to see us to make sure that she's linked in with everyone that she can possibly be linked in with? There are numerous agencies that can support people through that insurance process. And yes, the insurance company do have to answer to someone. We have had the insurance companies come to visit. We've had the Insurance Council of Australia to Rochester twice, and they are coming back again. And we try and put all of this information out. So we've got a paper copy of a newsletter. We have our weekly newspaper in print. There's numerous places online where you can find all of that information. And this again probably leads back to that finding your neighbourhood house in your community. 90% of the community would know that if they need to know the answer to a question, they come to the recovery hub and either speak to someone there or speak to the girls at community house, and we will point you in the right direction. And if we cannot help you, we will make phone calls and find the answer to the question.
Is the recovery hub? Yes.
The Recovery Fund hubs are one of those things that's funded. So it's a one-stop shop where people can go to get all the information and advice, including financial advice. So we fund financial advice services and we fund legal services. Those legal services are critical around insurance. Even if people think they're well insured, they should always get legal advice because the insurance floods in particular are very complicated. It's about how the water came in, whether it was a flood from the drain or a flood from the river or water rising or water from the sky or tidal. So it's very, very complicated. And there are a lot of people that are stuck on this issue right now. So that's one side of it, the individual side and how people can get help. And then there's the advocacy side that the Victorian Government plays. So we have regular meetings with the Insurance Council of Australia.
Are they the governing body?
They're the peak. Well, they're a peak body for insurance companies. And this is where it gets complicated because, yes, they are regulated, but ultimately they are a private business. Yeah. So they will do the assessment process of the house in a way that doesn't always meet the outcome for the person. So hence the legal advice is important. We play a broader advocacy role. So if there are the same issues coming up over and over again, for example, it's taking a long time for the assessments to get done, we would advocate with the ICA to try and get the insurance companies moving along. and use other providers across the country and ship them down to support the speed of those insurance claims. And the Treasurer has also got a relationship with the ICA at that macro high level. So it's quite tiered and complex, the insurance, but there is a problem with insurance in many parts of Victoria. The cost of insurance is becoming unattainable for a lot of people, and a lot of people can't actually get insurance at all, especially in riverine areas.
Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, or we are up to
One
time.
question.
One question?
One question.
Okay. That's yours, Arthur?
Yes. Amanda,
Okay.
what's the latest that relocated to Elmore? What's happening there?
Well, it might be a me question, it might be a Mariella question. So there is an exit plan. So there is an exit plan for everyone at the Elmore Village, and there is a date where that site will actually essentially close down so that life as normal can go on to the Elmore site, which is also the Elmore Field Day site. So all of the people that are at the Elmore Village have case managers, and those people are working with the residents very closely to ascertain what that exit plan will look like. So, you know, there are some people there that do have insurance but didn't have enough insurance, like Mariella touched on before. Some people are underinsured, some people may have just had building insurance and not contents insurance. So there's a huge range of variations, I guess, that depend on how well you actually do come out the other side of any emergency event, really. So those people, the residents that are at Elmore, we are working with ERB, with the local Shire capacity. Everyone on the ground is working to support those people and get them, you know, integrate them back into the community, as well as how their temporary accommodation is going to look. Some of them may be lucky enough to be able to move back into their homes, but it won't be very many, because we know that the process is very long for people to be able to get back into their own homes.
Mariella, do you need to add anything?
I think Amanda covered it beautifully.
Just the last, is there anybody still at the Mickleham site?
No, so Midland closed at, I think, mid-February. So it did have up to 500 people go through the Midland site, and I was quite cynical. I thought, oh no, there's no way people are going to travel from so far away, and they did. So that's the level of desperation that people had around securing safe accommodation, and it was actually very, very successful. People had their privacy, they were fed 3 meals a day, or they had full linen service, they had support workers on site. It was actually quite hard to close down for some people. For some people it was the first time they really felt really supported. There were a lot of people that were doing it rough beforehand, people that were living on the river in Shepton, on the Golden River, so they actually got some very, very good support. So it was, I would say, a very successful program.
So it's ready for the next disaster.
Hopefully the rental market will have improved by then, and we can have local. We're always, it's very, very important that people are as close to their communities as possible. Recovery is better when they're close to home.
Yes. Back to you, Arthur.
Thank you.
You driving home? There you go.
Thank you. Two presents.
Amanda, thank you. Thank you for coming down.
Thank you so much, Arthur. Really
On the way home.
appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mark.
Thanks very much, Arthur. Totally unexpected.
Thank you.
Very much.
Can you take on the plane? Can you take on the plane?
I'm sure I can. Thank you.
So you can have it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Also, thank you to Michael Quinn, our State President, to Mark, our National President, Mariella, Amanda, and to Brother Tony. Thank you also to the Membership Leadership Advisory Committee and staff members who have assisted in planning this day. Thank you. Finally, we thank you all who came here today at Cathedral Hall and those who joined us online. We are all now welcome to join us at the back of the hall for some afternoon tea. Thanks again everybody for joining this 223 Ozanam Conversation. Thank you.